Hello, I'm Ciaran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring us insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode I'm joined by Dr. Frank Campion, who's going to give us an update on some of the hill flocks involved in the Teagasc Better Farm sheep programme. With many of the flocks just finished pregnancy scanning, we discussed the results they achieved this year, including some of the fertility issues encountered in one of the flocks, along with some of the possible causes and follow-up actions that farmer has taken. We move on to discuss litter size, the management of twins, and the possibility that some of these flocks may be pushing litter size too high for their particular system. We discuss the need to look at the overall system on these farms and target levels of output that best match and suit the individual farm. We finish up with Frank highlighting how some of these farmers are managing new weather condition score at this point of the season. We start off, however, with Frank discussing the farms involved in the programme and those have recently finished up.
Okay, thanks for having me, Ciaran. So yeah, look, in terms of the Better Farm Sheep Programme, on the hill side of it, we currently have 7 flocks that are running a hill sheep enterprise. For 5 of these farms, they're running both a hill and a lowland sheep enterprise on the farms, and then 2 of them are running hill-only enterprises. And I suppose we've had a bit of a change in the hill side of the programme in the last few months, and we finished up with Dave McLaughlin in Donegal, and we've recruited 2 new farms to the programme just at the end of last year, one in Mayo and one in Donegal, and both of them are running hill sheep enterprises.
And David, he's one of the farmers featured in this year's Hill Conference, and many will have been on the farm in that region at various open days. We're very lucky to have worked with him over the years.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like he like as you said, he's featuring on the National Hill Sheep Conference this year. He has a very good story to tell. He's a real example of what can be achieved on a sheep farm, particularly one that's running hill and lowland sheep enterprises, where you do the basic management stuff really well and get the best out of the technologies available to you without doing anything overly madly complicated, but maybe just showing attention to detail.
And like just for the others, they're spread everywhere from Wicklow to Cork, Kerry, right the way up to Donegal on the west coast of the country. But there's updates available on each of them on the Teagasc website, obviously, and in the newsletter every month. And hopefully, look,
Exactly.
we'll try and feature some of them farmers on the podcast during the summer.
No, definitely. Like as you said, the monthly newsletter usually has a bit on the hill farms, and as we get information on them, we feed it out. And look at our intention with all the better sheep farms that we use them intermittently along the year, with you on the podcast or bits of videos and things like that.
And look, it's the one thing about having them spread around the country. There are slight subtle differences between each of the systems. Every hill is different, every system's a bit different, but I think some of the core messages come from have been useful. But just like speaking of messages and management on them, I suppose, Frank, one of the key tasks on them farms at the moment, the fairly high output hill flocks, I think they've all nearly scanned, maybe bar one of them. How is that going for them this year?
Yeah, so look at it, as you said, they've all scanned bar one, and we are looking at relatively high output hill flocks. And I suppose by and large, scanning has went well. Our scan litter sizes are ranging kind of 1.3 to 1.5 on the ones that have scanned. And our pregnancy rates are by and large good, except for on one flock where we seem to have a small issue. But scanning seems to have went well across the flocks.
Look, the challenge in any of them flocks, we'll maybe discuss the twin bit of it in a minute because I know that'll come up. But managing empties, like there's one of the flocks you said there, like the pregnancy rate I assume was a bit low in that one.
Yeah, so we've one flock where a pregnancy rate of just 75%, 76%. So that would be much lower than what we target, whereas the rest of flocks are all between 91 and 98%, So look at on those flocks, we've seen this over the years where issues can crop up with pregnancy rates, and look, if you're looking at some of our stuff coming out in the autumn, we're always saying to lads, you focus on your condition score and you focus on getting the live weight right. That makes a big difference to hill pregnancy rates, and we see that happening. But we can get cases we've seen over the years where single sire mating groups were being ran, which a lot of hill farmers like to do, where a ram doesn't work and maybe the single sire groups weren't collapsed and rams mixed up in time, and that can lead you to a low pregnancy rate. In this particular issue, we're not convinced it was that. The management around mating seems to have been fairly good and fairly on point. So we've taken a few blood samples and we're just investigating further to see what other, is there anything else underlying there that could be causing this problem. But I suppose it's one of the key things of scanning. Some hill farmers won't scan, and that's fair enough. But something I suppose any of our hill farmers are scanning. A couple of lads have only started scanning since we joined with them. And this flock is one of those flocks. And it's an important measure because finally you get the later size, you get the singles and the twins, and that improves your management in the run up to lambing. And ultimately you'll probably have a better lambing and a better crop of lambs out of it. But in the case of this flock here, we've after identifying a pregnancy rate issue, which may point us in another direction that's affecting the output from the flock, and it's very important data to have that allows you to, identify issues within the flock and deal with them when they crop up.
You're following up with the local vet now, like at 75, there's there's something kind of fundamentally wrong with that one, because you said like condition and that in that flock would have been fairly good coming in this November.
Yeah, exactly. Condition was all right. We've a lot of the management around the flock at mating seemed quite good even throughout the summer leading up to mating. So the local vet now is involved on it. We'll keep an eye on it, and when we have something to back out with it, something we can report on. But I suppose it's with these things is we have the result now is, and with any farmers, that you actually take steps then to deal with it. Bring in your vet, bring in your advisor, and see what's actually causing the issue.
And of course, look at those throws up even for the other flocks the option of what you want to do with empties and different things at this stage of the year. But just like to bring you to the other end of that, I suppose the other key aspect of management now is the litter size. So that's effectively what you're going to work with over the next months. That's what you're concerned about feeding. How has litter size fared on these flocks?
Litter size in these flocks is good, and I suppose, Ciaran, the thing you have to bear in mind with these flocks is the program they're in. So we look to go into a farm that's kind of a low to low average output, and we want to bring them to a high level of output, and we want to maximize the output from the system, but also the profit that's left to the farmer. So that takes a number of fundamental things change on the farm. Like we look at breeding policy, we look at your management, condition score, weight, we look at improving the green ground. I suppose it takes a few years for everything to click in. And I suppose one of the things we're probably seeing with some of the flocks that are maybe relatively early on in the journey with us is scanning rates are probably getting a small bit high in terms of they've went in and they've got the low hanging fruit and they've improved the condition score of the O's, they've improved the soil fertility on the green ground, they've done soil tests, spread a bit of lime, probably find themselves with a lot of extra grass at different times of the year that they mightn't be used to, and probably pushing scanning rates a small bit high. So if you just take an example of two of the flocks there of scanning 1.5, that may seem, look, it is a good scan, but for a hill farmer, we'd prefer to see them scanning maybe something around 1.2, 1.3 of a litter size, because just to suit the system. Ideally we want yours in a hill system spend as long as we can out at the hill. So after scanning for these lads, the singles in most cases are gone back to the hill, and most of them will probably hold back to the twins or some of the thinner singles after that. So if we have a lot of twins in that system, we're putting pressure on our already limited green ground, having to hold all these yaws back. We're not putting yaws back to the hill as much as we'd like. And that follows right through, as we go through now through lambing and into the lactation up to weaning, singles will go back to the hill quicker than twins, obviously. For some lads, maybe twins won't get back to the hill until quite late on in the period. So the more of those we have lying around, the more pressure we're putting on our green ground. And ultimately, the less grazing we're doing on the hill, which is ultimately what these yaws should be doing. And there's better ways that we can utilise, if we do get to the stage where we have green ground that's producing a lot of grass, there's better ways of utilising it, as we've seen with the likes of Dave McLaughlin and some of the other farmers that are coming through the programme now.
It's a bit of a question looking at the overall system for some of them. Like it is part of that progression, as you indicated. But I suppose your argument, Frank, it boils down to a hill flock really should have output of a good hill flock, but when it goes a bit beyond that, then you're incurring the cost of a lowland system, which is not necessarily where some of these farms want to go. Like I've seen in previous cases, like there's an argument for some of them maybe for split flocks and that down the line as well.
Exactly. There is a ceiling to it. There's an optimum that you want to get to. So like if we set the target for the lads, right, you want to wean greater than one lamb per yaw joined, well then obviously you need to scan greater than that, but you can go too far with that scanning on these hill systems. And as you said, there is alternatives. Like if you take what a lot of these flocks will be able to do is get their hill flock scanning 1.2, 1.3. That will leave them with maybe some surplus grass on the green ground that they can then run a high output sort of lowland flock on that, a small number of yaws that produce scanning 2 and weaning 1.6, 1.7 plus every year. High output fits into the system, but allows the hill flock to work away perfectly on its own with its allocation of green ground and use the hill to the maximum throughout the year. The hill yaws, Ciaran, you can push them as far as you want, but the thing is, genetics and everything comes into part. No matter how much you push a Scottish blackface, she's probably not going to go too high on the scanning rate. And as you say, you're going to incur the cost of the lowland system and have the output of the hill system. And I think a couple of our better farmers have seen that in action and will talk very well on it.
I suppose the other possibility for some of them, I was just going to say, Frank, is possibly taking that final crop of yaws for crossing as well, depending on what works in their own system. But it just feeds into that whole, you need to look at everything in context. Obviously, exactly. The conditions one of the key drivers of that litter size, but too many of the thinner end of it, and then we've more empty. So there is a balancing act there. I think is the key thing that's coming from that.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, and look, it's better to be scanning 1.5 and have yaws that are in great condition than to be scanning 1 and have yaws that are in poor condition and are going to be thin and struggling throughout the year. So it is the balancing act, but the ultimate way that you get that balancing act right is that you utilise your hill to the maximum. And at any time you have yours in, you handle them, you're keeping an eye on condition score. If you have those thinner yaws, like take it now, you're throwing yours back to the hill. If there's a few thinner ones, hold them back. The same, you know, after lambing, if you're putting yours back to the hill, a couple of thinner ones, hold them back. So manage it like that, but you're still getting the maximum utilisation of your hill, and that's how you'll get the optimum performance out of them.
Just in terms of management and feeding, like over the coming weeks for them flocks, they've scanned obviously now, you alluded to some of this earlier. What are they doing management wise or feeding wise?
So I suppose feeding wise, it kind of varies between the farms, and as you said, we have farms dotted right throughout the country, you know, so it'll vary somewhat, but by and large, singles are gone back to the hill on all the flocks. You know, in some cases, twins will have gone back for a couple of weeks. In other cases, then twins will be held in, I suppose, on more the improved ground or some green ground, and there'll be some supplementary feeding starting to go into them now in the run up to lambing. I suppose the thing with them is it comes back to, I suppose, different management strategies for those singles and twins. You know, where you have singles out on the hill, some of them will be feeding a cob, so you know, a kind of a large nut that can be spread out on the ground, or they'll be using high energy buckets maybe until closer to lambing, just to keep yaws gathered and to keep a bit of condition on them. And then as they get closer to lambing, the singles will be brought in closer and they'll be fed some meal in order to have them right at lambing time. For most of the lads, for the twins, look, they'll probably stay in at the minute. There will be some level of meal or silage going into them at this stage, and that'll continue right up until lambing time. And I suppose we have a bit of a variation in that management, and some of that comes down to Ciaran too, to suppose how long they've been in the program or not been in the program. Our ultimate aim for all these hill flocks is that realistically they should be lambing everything outdoors, you know, lambing kind of start of April onwards, you know, to suit the system. We're bringing lads maybe from a journey where they were lambing in March, putting a lot of hill yaws inside and moving back out to outside lambing out just takes a bit by degrees, you know. I suppose that's one of the key messages when you look at these lads, is that you won't change it all overnight. It takes a couple of years. So we'll have a few of the lads now who are only after starting back outdoor lambing in the last year or two, so they'll still house a few of the twins until I suppose they're more comfortable with lambing the singles outdoors, and then their ultimate aim is to get everything lambing outdoors in April and not be housing any of the hill yaws.
And just like for the context of that, that's predicated on the whole cost of that system once they moved in.
Exactly, it's the cost of the system. It's a low, you know what I mean. You can't be incurring huge costs on these hill systems, because the income at the end of the day isn't in it, you know, and ultimately you have to match the system to suit what you have. So that's going to be in most cases an outdoor lambing flock that's weaning greater than one lamb per year to the ram, and lambing from sometime in April onwards.
Just like to go back to one other management aspect, look, we've had a number of wet weeks there in a row, and particularly a spell of hard weather. Handling for condition is something we often talk about, even independent of singles or twins. The importance of that needs hill flocks, and are any of them actually segregating ewes on that basis?
Yeah, so look, we have lads that do that, and we encourage that. And you know, handling and condition can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. So handling and condition is, first thing is first. It's not looking in over the field gate or over the pen and saying they look well or they look poor. It's actually putting your hand on the ewe. So when you have them in for something like scanning, or if you're doing your Clostridium vaccinations, that's the time to actually put your hand on them. Feel along the backbone and along between the last rib and the hip bone. So you're feeling along that area. You know, and if you're feeling that they're under conditioned, so when we say under conditioned, when you're feeling along the back, the easier it is to pick out each of the spinous processes along the back, and the sharper those bones feel, the less condition they have. So it's about, if you feel those yaws are thin, pulling off the thinner ones, you know, giving them that extra bit of doing. So if it's the case that the singles are going back out now after scanning, keep them ones back in with the twins, give them that extra little bit just to, you know, build a little bit of condition, or at least maintain what condition they have on them. You know, and that should probably be practiced throughout the year on most of these hill flocks. You know, whenever you have those yaws pass it through, put your hand on them, have a feel, see what's happening along the back and just below the ribs. And that'll give you an idea of actually how good your nutrition is for that flock. And, you know, we've seen over the years, Ciaran, how important body condition score is for these hill yaws. So it requires year-round management, and now is a particularly important time that you can be doing it.
You're trying to reduce some of the problems for later on.
Exactly, yeah.
Look, Frank, we'll try and catch up with you later in the year just for an overview of the farms. We might try and get some of them on as well. Thanks very much for coming on with today and giving us a quick update on them.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Ciaran.
Okay, we'll finish things up at this point. Again, you can get updates on any of the Better Farm flocks on the sheep section of the Teagasc website. They're also included in the Teagasc Sheep newsletter. And we'll try and feature some of them in various other media outputs, from videos to this podcast during the year, so you can keep track of the progress they're making on the farms and kind of key issues at that particular time of the year. I'd like to thank Frank again for coming on with us and giving us an update on them. Obviously, like, balancing the hill system can be quite complicated, and improvements in many cases can take a number of years to see full effects and change around some of the systems on these farms. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on the sheep program, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciaran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.